basically back an old Packers game for the last 25, 30 years, and then have a guest on to talk about the show, to talk about that game. And to talk about the game that we have is Steve Scaffidi from WTMJ. Catch him from 9 to noon over on 620 WTMJ. And Steve, how long have you been a Packers season ticket holder?
Since 1983.
Okay.
I was a senior in college. I got that letter. I still have the letter.
You still have it? Is it like framed?
No, but I have it
Okay.
in a file. But it was amazing then because my dad introduced me to the Packers. I went to games in the 60s, saw Bart Starr play, went to Lambeau Field, which looked a lot different then than it does now. So it's been a long run. I've seen hundreds of games at Lambeau Field in all of its incarnations. Huge Packers fan.
So what was the wait list like when you got on in 1983?
It wasn't like it is now. Because I didn't put in that many years, like maybe 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe less.
Because they had mentioned through the course. So we found a broadcast of this game on YouTube. I'll send out the YouTube link. It was broadcast on NBC because of the Packers. So the game we're talking about is from Christmas Eve in 1995, which at that point was the last week of the regular season,
Yes.
which seems impossible now since the regular season goes through the middle of January.
Right.
But it was the last game of the regular season. If you're a Packers fan to remember, if you don't, I'll kind of set the stage. Packers playing the Steelers. The Packers win the game. They win their first division in 23 years. Mm-hmm. Steelers had something to play for as well. They needed some help, but they were trying to get the number one seed in the AFC. So this wasn't a game where the Steelers were just kind of sitting everyone, and the Steelers ended up going to the Super Bowl that year. So the Packers have a lot on the line, and the broadcast had mentioned at one point that there was some sort of incident at a Giants game the day before where fans were throwing snow on the field.
That's right, yeah.
And before this game, they had announced to Packers fans, hey, if anybody's caught throwing snow on the field, not only will they be taken to jail, they will lose their season tickets. And then they mentioned it was like 19,000 at that point deep for season tickets.
You're not old enough to remember the history, but back in the day in the 60s, fans stormed the field.
Oh, yeah.
They took down the goalposts. I have a friend.
From the Ice Bowl. I've got very famous pictures.
I've got a friend whose dad had a piece of the uprights in his basement.
From the Ice Bowl.
From the Ice Bowl. Signed by a bunch of players. So, I mean, that's the crazy. So I get it. I think I told you this before. I was at the game, the Yancey Thigpen game.
Yeah.
And a quick memory from the moment, and I'm sure we'll get into some of the details. The moment when it's not a spoiler.
You're not spoiling.
When he drops
the game's
pass,
28 years old.
Yeah. When he drops a pass, he should have caught.
Yeah. He was wide open.
Yeah, and he had a pretty decent game before that. And he's a great receiver. My brother-in-law, Jeff, who went because it was Christmas Eve, and my wife had to prepare for all the Christmas festivities. He jumps on my back in the stands, and it was cold and slippery and icy.
I believe the broadcast said wind chill was 0 degrees.
Yes, it was like 20, but felt a lot colder than that. I that time I sat outside a lot. I never sit outside anymore. I sit in my swanky club seats indoor, which are much preferred. I'm sweating when it's like 0 outside. So he jumps on my back. He almost wipes us out. We almost both broke our necks, but it was pandemonium in the place. And watching it on the tape you sent me, I missed some of that stuff. Some of the other stuff that was, Chewy caught a touchdown pass in the game. Robert Brooks jumping into the stands. Was that pre-Leroy Butler? Because he was on the team.
Well, yeah.
Leroy.
So Leroy did it first, and here's what, because I remember this like distinctly as a kid. So in 1995, I don't want to make you feel old here, but I was 1995. I'm 9 years old watching this game.
Nice,
all right, I'm 9 years old watching this game.
You don't remember this.
I do. I do. So I do remember this game, and I remember the game, but I more specifically remember when I was a kid, they used to have the VHS yearbook tapes that were a half hour long. I wore those things out, Steve. I had one from 94, 95. I had two different ones from 1996, the year they won the Super Bowl, because they had like a half hour one that was the typical one, but then they had a special hour one because they were the Super Bowl champs. So I had those. I wore those things out watching those because I wasn't listening to the radio at the time, but because of those videos, they would take the Jim Irwin call, which was on WTMJ at the time. They had the Jim Irwin call over it. And I remember I can do you verbatim, the Jim Irwin, Max McGee call from when Yancey Thigpen dropped the ball, because I've watched that 1,000 times in the VHS tape.
If you watch that drive, which the Steelers, they methodically moved down the field, and they should have won the game. The Packers ended up winning 24-19. That touchdown would have given the Steelers the win and home field throughout, which they didn't need anyway because they went to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
But it was deflating. And if you remember the critical drive, they gave them a first down.
So I forgot about that until I went back and watched it.
I did too. They gave him that first down. Neil O'Donnell did not make that first down. He got crushed.
Oh, so there was a 4th and inches tried a quarterback sneak. He gets undercut. And of course, there's not replay in 1995. So they end up giving him the spot. Even the announcers, which that's one of the first things and I didn't quite recognize the voices. I remember the voices from watching the game.
Was it Randy Cross?
Randy Cross was one of them.
Who was the other guy?
I couldn't quite but he was very critical of a lot of things going on. Yeah. Things that you don't hear 28 years later on NFL telecasts.
It was like the evolution of the old style of broadcasting with a little bit of the new, like, little snarkiness to it.
Yeah,
that's what it felt like.
100%. He's like, I don't think they got it. Oh, they definitely didn't get it. Like, if you were a fan of the Steelers, you'd be like, why are these guys so much, people would be going on social media. These guys are homers. They're rooting for the Packers. No, like, and at one point, this guy was like awing at a Craig Hentrick punt. Just, what a punt that was. And it was a lot of fun to go back and kind of remember some of these things. And it's just kind of funny to hear now, like they were calling 1995 the year of the pass because everybody was throwing the ball. Yeah. And so I went back. I've got the box score here from the game. Neil O'Donnell threw the ball. It's 0 degrees wind chill. Neil O'Donnell threw the ball 55 times.
Which is insane even now on a good day.
Yeah. Like that's, so he was.
But if you remember the broadcast, they couldn't do anything on the ground. Their top two running backs were out.
Yeah.
Bam Morris and I forget the other guy's name.
Yeah, Bam Morris was their top one. Their other one was out. And they had like another running back that was only going to play if they really needed him to. And like he suited up, but they wanted to still try to rest him. So they couldn't do anything on the ground. He threw it 55 times. Brett threw it 32, but still threw for 301 and 2 touchdowns in the game. Like, what do you remember about that 1995 team? Let's just kind of, dive into that 1995 team, because it was a team that ended up being pretty special. They also started with a loss against the Rams and built their way up. They won double-digit games for the first time in forever. First time in the Brett Favre era, Mike Holmgren era, they won double-digit games, but still needed
division title. Yeah. Yep. At the time, Central, right?
NFC Central.
Brett Favre amazing that season. I don't know if he won the MVP.
That was his first of 3 in a row.
Yeah, so amazing.
He had 38 touchdown passes that year.
Reggie White dominant during the regular season. Sean Jones, that acquisition, one of those acquisitions that next year, 96 Super Bowl season, made a big difference. Craig Newsome in the secondary.
Yeah, he was a rookie that year.
Yeah, it's a pretty good player. We always had Leroy Butler, who was already a good player, but was emerging. Now we know a Hall of Famer. Chewy had actually a pretty good season that
was
year.
His first Pro Bowl. That was his first of 3 Pro Bowls that year.
And it's just fascinating to watch. It was also outside of the game itself and the result of the game. The first time I think they ever played We Are the Champions in the modern era for that team, because they had won the Central. Now, obviously, next year got way more exciting than that with the Super Bowl team.
But did you buy because I had an NFC. It still might be in my parents' like now everyone got NFC North Championship gear. Get that away from me. We're Packers fans. We don't get that. But at the time, it was so exciting.
Everybody rushed out.
I had an NFC, and it still might be at my parents' house. I don't know. I got to go find it. But I had an 1995 NFC Central Division Champions hat.
I probably have that. I probably have a pennant somewhere because I'm a collector. I've got everything. I probably got everything from that season. One of the other, if you want to look at me as a collector, as a fan of the team, I have every home ticket stub and some of the away stubs from Brett Favre's career.
Oh, wow.
I kept them all. And also, by the way, Aaron Rodgers.
So they haven't gone digital only at Lambeau then.
Well, not at that time. That's a
but you said for Aaron Rodgers. So like the last couple of years, what'd you do for Aaron Rodgers?
What they do is they give you a commemorative ticket. So I've kept those. That's only the last 2 years though.
Yeah.
Everything before that, you had a ticket stub. Matter of fact, in the early days, they ripped it in half.
Oh yeah.
At some point, they realized we'll just have a perforation, and you can perforate this thing and not damage the ticket.
Yeah.
I actually have graded tickets from some of Favre's best games of Aaron Rodgers' first start as a Packer in the first game of 2008 season against the Vikings.
Against the Vikings, Monday Night Football. I remember that game very distinctly.
I'm a true collector, and I saved all that stuff. Now, my wife would tell you I'm crazy. But that game, you asked the perspective of what that meant that season. That was kind of the start of all this, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of that first big step. That year was the first year I went to a game. I went to the Bengals game, which was a couple of weeks before that with my mom, my aunt. And I remember some of the throws Brett Favre made to this day. But kind of going into this game, I mean, there was so much leading into this because winning the division just felt so important. And they mentioned it multiple times in the broadcast that this kind of felt like that next step because it had gone, Brett starts, they go 9-7, miss the playoffs. Next year, 9-7, get in, have the miracle game against the Lions where Favre hits sharp and they win a playoff game. Then they get to host a playoff game in 1994 against the Lions. They win that. So the next step in the progression was winning the division. And that's exactly what this team did. One player we haven't talked about who was huge, and they did the comparison. I was always a huge Sterling Sharp fan as a kid. Loved Sterling Sharp. I was devastated when he had to retire because of the neck injury.
He would have been a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
Maybe still should be.
I think he should be. If some of these guys who are in because of injuries, like especially, like the numbers don't look super impressive now, but when you consider the era, like back-to-back years, he set the NFL receptions record in 92, 93.
And oh, by the way, had like 1,500 yards. If you watched him play, you realized how good he was. He got open. You talk about those Lions playoff games. He got open and like when you never expected it. There's Sterling Sharp streaking down the field into the end zone for a touchdown. That's the kind of player he was.
So to replace that type of player, and for Robert Brooks to step up the way he did, and he ended up, I mean, he had a huge game against the Steelers the last game of the year, had 11 catches. I got it right here. 11 catches for 137 yards and a touchdown. Yeah. That got him over 100 receptions, which, again, today is still a really good mark.
He broke Sterling Sharp's record for yards in a season as a receiver.
Yeah. I mean, he had a 99-yard touchdown that year against the Bears. Like, he did so many great things. Like, Robert Brooks, I feel like, because he then got injured the next year and wasn't on the field for the Super Bowl victory, you know, you had Antonio, you had Andre. I feel Robert is one of the more underrated Packers receivers ever, because of what he did in this season, especially with the pressure of having to replace Sterling Sharp.
I totally agree. Fascinating player to watch. Got open, put up big numbers, got hurt. And then you saw the emergence of Antonio Freeman, who kind of replaced him.
Yeah.
And Freeman was a fun player to watch, as we know as well. And they're kind of on the same level, right?
Yeah. I mean, when Robert came back the year they lost against San Diego in the Super Bowl, or they went to San Diego and lost to the Broncos in the Super Bowl, both of them had 1,000-yard seasons, but Robert just wasn't quite the same after the knee injury. ACLs, you know, I mean, we've seen it. They can be a big deal now, but not as big of a deal. Back then, they were still pretty devastating injury, especially with somebody with the speed, agility, and quickness that Robert Brooks had. Free ended up being, I think, probably one of the top 4 or 5 receivers of all time in Packers history.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of why Brooks ends up getting overshadowed.
Yeah, Freeman was always a great player to watch, and that wasn't his rookie.
That was his rookie year in '95 because he was returning punts.
That's right. Yeah, that was the other element. And the other great thing about the broadcast, which I watched last night, they focused on a special teams player, Crawford. They showed him on the bench. His stoppage on that punt, from Hendrick on the 1 or 2 yard line, changed the dynamic of that game.
Yeah, it ended up getting a short field because Free ended up getting a good punt return, 32-yard short field. That's where Chewy ended up having his touchdown reception to put the Packers up by 2 scores.
But rewatching the game, you realize the Packers dominated most of the game, right? And at the end, we're losing this game.
There were 2 things that really stood out to me. It was the end of half, because the Packers scored a touchdown at the end of the first half, and they're up 2 scores. And there's just under 2 minutes left after Favre hit Brooks for a touchdown. And you're going, all right, here we go. And the Steelers march down the field like that and get a touchdown to cut it down to a single possession game right before halftime. And then they get the ball back at the end of the game as well, and they marched down the field. It wasn't as quick because it wasn't the 2-minute drill. Eventually, it got inside 2 minutes, but they had plenty of time. But by the time the 2-minute warning hit, they were at the 35.
Yeah, it was like a very well orchestrated drive. They got a gift on the first down, but it was painful as a fan to watch. Especially fans were irritated about that call, but you just saw it unfolding. There wasn't a lot of confidence, which led to that intense and crazy celebration because you weren't expecting it. No one expects Yancey Thigpen to drop a wide open pass in the end zone.
You want to talk about records? He set, I think it was John Stallworth's record. He broke the receptions record again, because that was something they mentioned on the broadcast. He had broken the Steelers single season record for receptions in this game. Like, he had a big game. Neil O'Donnell throwing the ball 55 times. Thigpen had 6 catches for 80 yards. He was just missing if he catches that, now he's got, 7 for 87 and a touchdown.
I think he had a touchdown earlier in the game, right?
He did not.
He did not.
Ernie Mills.
That's who it was.
Who was a pretty underrated receiver.
And I'm not a huge Neil O'Donnell fan, but he had a pretty good game.
Oh, yeah, he absolutely did. I mean, and the Packers were constantly putting pressure on him. The other thing that stands out is football's changed a little bit, Steve. Football's changed.
Yes.
There was a hit that Newsome had early that kind of knocked him down.
Yes.
You were concerned about the wide receiver that he
had. It was like
hit.
3 guys laying out.
Oh, my goodness. It was such a physical game. And there was another, right before he threw the touchdown to Chewy, Brett takes a huge hit at the goal line. He decides to try to run it in, dives for it, And knowing what we know now about Brett and what happened after the 1995 season, it makes you wonder if maybe some painkillers may have. So if you haven't seen the game, Brett dives and he's like shaken up. He tries to shake it off. They don't show him going down on the field, but eventually they start describing what happened and they throw it down to Jim Gray on the sideline.
Right.
And Jim's like, yeah, he got hit in the stomach. And then they show the hit again. I go, he didn't get hit in the stomach. He dives and he gets hit in the shoulder. Another guy comes from the other side, hits him in the other shoulder, probably hits his head a little bit.
There's a lot of weight on him, onto his back and shoulder on a very hard ground.
Yes. So I'm wondering if there's a potential concussion there because he vomited. They're like, oh, he vomited. Oh, but they're just saying he got hit in the stomach, clearly trying to cover.
No protocols for any of that. No. Send him back out there. And he went back out.
And he finished the game. So I don't know if it was concussion. I'm guessing at that time, because Brett was addicted to Vicodin at that time, if that contributed to any sort of vomiting that he did, that's kind of went through my mind. But also, like, if he made that, there was nothing dirty about anything anybody did there. He just took a couple of huge hits because he was reckless in the way he was trying to score. If a quarterback tried to do that now, I guarantee there would have been flags on the play.
Oh, absolutely. And that's how it's changed. I mean, they've certainly protected the quarterback. Mm-hmm. I'm sure Brett Favre, wherever he is now, down in Louisiana or wherever, is saying to himself, well, I wish we had those rules then because he'd probably be a healthier guy. Probably have a smarter brain, or a healthier brain.
A healthier brain at the very least. And but he went back in. He eventually came out again after he took another big hit.
We got to see Jim McMahon,
who was the backup quarterback at the time, and he actually even threw a pass.
Yeah, 10 years post Super Bowl win with the Bears.
Yeah.
So a lot of people forget that he was on the Packers.
Yeah.
And the famous thing, of course, is when they went to the White House after the Super Bowl, he's got the Bears jersey.
He wore his Bears jersey on,
which I love. It's classic Jim McMahon.
It's surprising it didn't rub more people the wrong way, but I think everyone's just kind of like, it's just Jim.
Well, at the time, that was the start of kind of, we saw some Bears players coming up to Green Bay, and that that back and forth has changed. Now we have Robert Tonyan playing for the Bears. Mm-hmm. So that back and forth changed then, because there used to be not that it's better now, but there was a hatred.
Oh, yeah. Well, of course. I mean, in the 70s, in the 80s, the Bears were beating the Packers' brains in the way the Packers have done over the last 30 years with Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers.
You think it'll change now?
I mean, both teams are going through a rebuild.
Yeah, which makes it exciting.
Yeah, which makes it exciting.
Both I have no idea what's going to happen.
No idea. All. No clue.
I don't think anybody does.
No.
You know what Fields is going to be. You know what Jordan Love's going to be.
No, the scary thing is I actually, and again, who knows how it works out, but I kind of like some of the moves the Bears have made, like trading out of the first spot, getting DJ Moore. I think Justin Fields has a lot of potential. I think he can be really good. So the fact that they're still trying to build around him, giving him weapons, like they're making right decisions. And they hadn't made right decisions, I feel, for the longest time. So that makes me a little worried as a Packers fan. But we'll see what they have in Jordan Love and see if this young core that they can have can grow the way that, and they pointed this out in the broadcast as well. So many guys were in their fourth year in 1995 with Green Bay. Mike Holmgren, Chewy, Brett Favre, Edgar Bennett, Robert Brooks. Like they had this core offensively that helped them win the Super Bowl next year, the following year.
Mike Holmgren thing's interesting because I interviewed him a couple of years back and he was very thoughtful and generous with his time. But I said, you should be in the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. And I think he's a Hall of Fame coach. He went to 3 Super Bowls. He lost 2, which generally means it's going to be a while if you do get there. But I think what he did with that franchise at the time, and I experienced all of that because I went through the 70s, watching on TV, in the 80s, watching in person, and they had a good season in 82, and then not so much for like 10 more years. To do what he did, along with Ron Wolf, Reggie White, Brett Favre, was pretty amazing. We've been, I'm honest, we've been spoiled. Incredible arrivals, especially at quarterback. I'm under no illusion that's going to continue. But let's just throw it out there. If it does, that would be off the charts amazing. Let's do it. I wouldn't the trifecta of greatness.
That would be fantastic.
Let's do it.
Going back to Holmgren, I feel Holmgren, I think he's a Hall of Fame coach as well. Because maybe it's the bias because of I didn't have to live through it like you did, but I was very aware as a kid. Like my parents, my aunts, my uncles would always tell me about you don't understand how awesome this is because of how bad it was and how much Holmgren and Wolf changed the culture. And I think that means something, especially in Green Bay, to change the culture the way they did. Plus, he started, whether it ended up being a trend that didn't last for very long, but I feel like he's the one who started the trend of being head coach and general manager, which is why he left Green Bay in the first place.
I give him this. He took a franchise that had been struggling and made something out of them and gave us all great memories. And at that time, won Super Bowl since the Lombardi era, now two under Rodgers and Mike McCarthy. But he changed the kind of the messaging along with Ron Wolf about what this franchise could be. There was so many like sad sack years when we were the foils of the Bears or the foils of the Vikings. And he did dynamic things on offense that we hadn't seen before. He brought in really cool receivers, had the Edgar Bennett's and Dorsey Levens, guys that really could hit the line and run. He made it exciting on offense. We hadn't seen a lot of that. We had a boring offense for a lot of years.
What's amazing, you bring up Dorsey Levens. So I was curious just because they called it the year, it's the year of the pass. And Brett Favre had 570 pass attempts, which the last time that the Packers had 16 games would have been the 2020 season. Aaron Rodgers, who also won MVP that year, had 526.
Right.
So Brett had, almost 50 more pass attempts that year in an era where they weren't throwing the ball as much as they are now. But the impressive part is, so Edgar Bennett led the team with 316 rushing attempts. Next was Brett Favre with 39.
Yeah, well, he ran.
It was one guy. But then Dorsey had 48 catches that year. So even though and Dorsey Levens would eventually become a Packers Hall of Fame running back, and he would become more a part of the running game the following year. But he kind of showed what weapon he could be by having nearly 50 catches as a second running back.
Well, that's the San Francisco thing, right?
Yeah.
He took that idea because Holmgren was on that staff and brought it to Green Bay. That was the transformation of the offense. That's what a lot of people were saying. We got to be more than just, the old days of John Brockington and MacArthur Lane. Yeah, it's great if it's working, but if it's not, you have a really boring offense. You're going to lose most games, or they're going to be very close. We saw the emergence in 95 and 96, of course, of this emergent, rising, creative offense that made it exciting to be a Packers fan again. Oh, and here, by the way, next year we're going to give you the number one defense in the NFL, led by Reggie White. Congratulations.
Well, they would add Santana Dotson, and he would replace John Yurkovich on the defensive line, and then George Teague would be out at starting safety, and they replaced him with Eugene Robinson. And those were just kind of two huge additions, just veteran presences who were hungry to win that championship that helped, and then Craig Newsome continues to grow. Leroy becomes the force that he is. And Reggie wasn't healthy in this game. This was also the year where God healed his hamstring.
Yeah. Amazing story.
Yes. Oh, he had torn his hamstring. I can't remember how much earlier in the season.
I think it was like 3 or 4 games earlier.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he missed the game or he didn't miss a game, but
everybody thought he was going to be done for a while.
Yeah, that's it. He's done.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he magically showed up at Holmgren's house saying, God healed my hamstring. And he played the rest of the year.
I'm always curious what he would be like now, because he would have lived through the Rodgers era, that Super Bowl. And like, what would his message be? He would, the day they announced they got Reggie White, I was driving somewhere for work. And we knew this might happen, but we Packers fans, we're realistic, sort of. And they announced it. I'm like pounding on I was that excited by myself, pounding on my steering wheel. Oh my God, we got Reggie White.
Yeah.
And it transformed the defense.
Oh yeah, it absolutely did. And Chewy gets offended anytime somebody compares somebody to Reggie White. You got Aaron Donald. Oh, Aaron Donald's the modern day Reggie White. Chewy goes, you have no idea how strong Reggie was.
He threw guys that weighed 300 pounds with one arm.
Yeah. Just go watch a Reggie. One of my Reggie would have the hump move where he took the inside and just would shuck him. Just one arm like this and be able to shuck him. And one of my favorite Reggie White highlights, I want to say, was probably where he threw Chris Carter into the Vikings quarterback. Like Chris Carter's running in motion to the other side. I don't think he was supposed to block. He just happened to be there. Yeah. And Reggie just shoves Hall of Famer Chris Carter into the quarterback.
Dude himself.
Yeah, into the quarterback to get a sack.
Reggie's like, you're in my way, but you're not really in my way. Get out of here.
And the other amazing thing about Reggie White is Chewy said, I don't think Reggie knew where the weight room was.
Natural.
Just naturally that big, that fast, that strong. And just knew how to use it.
Here's something he did as a fan. I remember this because, again, I saw all those games. I think at one point they won like 30 straight home games. It was crazy. And they played We Are the Champions, all that stuff. He would go around it and slap hands after the win with all of the people in the front rows and people that came down. And I thought, wow, that's a guy that gets it. There's names that we all talk about. Rodgers now, of course, and Reggie and Favre and Ron Wolf. It wasn't just a play. It wasn't just a record. It wasn't just the championship. It was those group of guys.
They connected to the fans.
Absolutely. And I met them all at signings because I'm a collector, and I met Reggie. I still have the football that he signed in the silver Sharpie on my mantle in my Packers shrine downstairs. I treasure that thing. And he was so nice when I was talking to him. So was Brett Favre. I had him sign a couple things. Just fun to talk to. Loved football.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the kind of players that we, as fans, we hope we have.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the case that much anymore, because I know there's a lot of fans that can be crazy as well.
Oh, yeah. And the money has gotten so high that you don't know. And Chewy has talked about this throughout the course of off-season stuff. When Jair Alexander didn't show up, Chewy's like, I got $50 a day. Yeah. I was excited for $50 right. a day, and he eventually would go on to be one of the highest paid tight ends. He actually had the contract at one point to be the highest paid tight end in the NFL.
And now you get to work with him.
Yeah. And which is amazing.
Yes.
But he's got great stories, but it's just the money just continues to get higher and higher and higher. And you wonder how much disconnect there is. Clearly there are guys that love football and would do anything for it. But when the money's that high, it kind of leaves the door open for other guys to kind of sneak in.
Yeah. Here's the reality check for fans that have been fans of the Packers recently and not so much historically. The best players on the team, the Bart Starrs, and you can pick a name from that era, the 60s era, the Lombardi teams, the best players had off-season jobs.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't making millions of dollars.
Yeah.
They made 100,000, 150,000, which seems like a lot, and it was a lot then. I'm not saying it isn't, but they had summer jobs. They had other jobs.
No, training camp was actually for getting in shape.
Yeah.
That's why training camp
existed. If you were Paul
existed.
Hornung, you were really out of shape when you came in. Now, he was a great, talented player and a Hall of Famer, but he liked to enjoy life.
Oh, yeah.
And he came in out of shape, and, of course, Lombardi got him all back into shape.
So just kind of quickly then the rest of the year. So the Packers end up winning this game. Again, the part I remember from the call that I mentioned earlier, Nancy Thigpen dropped it. He was wide open. And jumping in, Max McGee was, and the only one happier is Lenny McGill because he was supposed to cover him.
Yeah, he did not cover him at all.
No.
I mean, he got smoked on the
Lenny
play.
McGill was the dime back for the nickel back for the Packers.
If you get a chance to watch it, just look at the reaction of the sidelines.
Yeah.
Bill Cowers he thinks he's got a touchdown.
Yeah.
Young looking Bill Cowers,
yes.
by the way. He's got to be, in his 30s then?
Probably.
Man, and I don't know how old he is now, but he looked young looking in Holmgren, obviously early in his tenure, and he's thinking the worst. And that's how the fans were.
Yeah.
Thinking the worst, all of a sudden, best thing that ever could happen happened.
And then, Brett takes the knee, and he took off for the tunnel. He put the football up, and he just starts sprinting towards the tunnel. I want to say the Journal Sentinel the next day had a picture of him running towards the tunnel because that's just a picture that's in my brain of him holding the football up. So the Packers would go on. They would get to host a playoff game again. Mm-hmm. Second year in a row they would do that. They would beat the Falcons. But then the biggest moment of the season came the following week when they went into the house of the defending champion San Francisco 49ers and smacked them.
Yep. And that, as a fan watching that, totally unexpected.
Yeah.
I thought, they'll be good.
Mm-hmm.
Totally unexpected.
So Craig Newsome, first play from scrimmage. I believe George Kuntz forced the fumble, or maybe Wayne Simmons did.
Wayne Simmons.
It was Wayne Simmons, yeah. So Newsome scoops it up, goes in. You're going, wait, what?
Yeah.
Wait, the Packers are actually – because when they had gone up against the Cowboys in previous years in the playoffs, they just got boat raced. They got ran out of the they got ran off the field.
All of a sudden, Brett Favre couldn't remember who to throw to.
Yeah. And now you're going up against the 49ers. Okay, it's different than Dallas, and but they would go on to win that game 27-17. They dominated defensively, and they really set the tone. Chewy then, when he talks about that NFC Championship game, the Packers had a lead going into the fourth quarter of that NFC Championship game. He said going into San Francisco, they knew they could win. Going into Dallas, they're like, we think we can win.
Yeah.
And that's probably what cost them in the fourth quarter. But they flew back to Green Bay going, no, we can beat those guys. They didn't get to play the Cowboys in the playoffs the following year, but obviously they would go on to win the Super Bowl.
I said this for years about the importance at that time of home field advantage. If they would have had that advantage, they would have went to more Super Bowls. Dallas beat up on them in Dallas several years. Favre had his worst games. Like one game, I think he had 6 interceptions. It was horrific.
Mm-hmm.
If they would have had a better regular season record and could have gotten that home field, they would have went to more Super Bowls.
Well, the one thing I remember the following year when they beat San Francisco again, this time at Lambeau Field.
I cried after that game because
really?
I knew we were going to the NFC Championship.
Yeah, and it was going to be in Green Bay.
Yep.
Because the Packers had the number 1 seed.
There's that importance of the regular season.
Were you chanting "We want Dallas"? Because there were. No. I remember fans chanting "We want Dallas."
I wanted nothing to do with Dallas. To be honest, give me the Carolina Panthers.
Well, and that's who they got, and they dominated. And of course,
not at the beginning of the game though.
Yes.
They were down early because they fumbled early in the game, but after that it was complete dominance. And the thing about that game, I sat outside for that one as well. It was colder.
Oh, yeah.
Because remember, San Francisco, heavy rain, muddy, Steve Young injured, not injured, whatever. And then that next week, it was cold.
Yeah.
I'll never forget the cold.
Just the steam coming off of players for that game. I remember watching that sitting at home at TV. Steve, this has been a lot of fun, buddy.
Man, I love talking Packers.
Oh, so I love talking Packers.
This is why I should have a sports show.
This is exactly why you should have a sports show. We need to have you on more to talk about some of this great Packers stuff. I will put out a link when we post this as well of that 1995 Packers game against the Steelers on Christmas Eve, a historic game in which the Packers won their first division title in 23 years. He's Steve Scaffidi. Make sure you catch him on 620 WTMJ each and every weekday from 9 until noon. We will be back more later this summer with more Repackables and more on the Packed Summer.